Creo Parametric, datum features are imaginary features that we create in order to build and manipulate the solid features that we want to make. A datum plane is a flat imaginary reference, and it has many different uses. Whenever we start off a brand new model, for example, if I go to the New button and choose Part or an Assembly, I can use a default template or one of my custom templates. And I'm going to start off with my aerospace template. And our model starts off with default datum planes. And these default datum planes provide references that allow us to create sketches and sketch-based features. And also in an assembly, they're used to assemble various different components. Let's take a look at another use of datum planes. I'm going to switch over to a skeleton model. Skeletons are used in top-down design, and in skeleton parts, you'll see a lot of different datum planes that are used to lay out your product. Let's go back to another model that I have open. This is a planetary gear courtesy of Schneider Electric, great company. And I've opened up this part here, and all it has is an import feature. I don't even have default datum planes. If I want to create the default datum planes, you can go to the Datum Overflow menu on the Model tab and then choose Offset Planes. And here it allows us to specify offsets in the X, Y, and Z directions. And I'll use values of 0, and that'll in essence create our default datum planes. We can grab these different references and drag it above the imported geometry if we want. You'll notice that Creo Parametric gave these features the default name of DTM followed by a number, but you can select them and rename them. For example, this particular plane, maybe I want this one to be called right instead of DTM1. And you could do the same thing with the other different datum planes that are created. Another big use of datum planes is for your sketch-based features. You can use them as your sketch plane, orientation reference plane, sketch references, and depth references. So you'll see that datum planes have a number of different uses. And later on in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about when you should not use datum planes, because it is very common for people to create way too many datum planes. In earlier versions of Creo Parametric, especially back when it was known as Pro Engineer, you needed to create a lot of datum planes. If you pull open an old model, you'll find them just littered with datum planes, but that's not as necessary anymore. All right, so right now, even as I just started creating a few different datum features, my screen is getting cluttered, so I can use the datum display drop down in the in-graphics toolbar in order to turn off the display of some of my different datums. You'll also notice that there is a control here for toggling the display of your planes on or off. If you go to the View tab, we have controls for toggling the display of the labels on or off as well, so that can be used to reduce your clutter. Let's take a look at some of the different methods of creating datum planes. First off, I am going to create a datum plane by clicking on the plane icon. And when I hover over that icon in the ribbon, you'll notice that it gives me a tooltip that says the keyboard shortcut is the letter P for creating a datum plane. Let's click on that. And let's say I wanted to go through this surface. I will select that surface. And right now it's giving me a default of an offset of 20 based on the last datum plane that I created. But I wanted to go right through that surface. So if I click on the drop-down list, you can see that I can create it through the surface, parallel to the surface, normal to the surface, or a midplane. If I use any of these other 3 different options in here, you notice that the OK button is grayed out because I don't have enough references in order to define the exact location of that plane. But let's change it to through. We have the OK button. And before I click OK, I want to show you some of the other different controls on the other tabs. First off, if I go to the Display tab, we have the ability to flip the normal direction. Just like a sheet of paper has 2 sides, datum planes have 2 sides. They have what used to be called as the positive side and the negative side. And that's something that was a lot more important in earlier versions of Pro Engineer, not as important these days. And one thing that you might notice, it's hard to discern these days, but if you rotate a model, you'll actually notice that one side of the datum plane by default is brown and the other is gray, but the colors are so close to each other, it's hard to tell the difference. In earlier versions, they were yellow and red to make a bigger distinction between the positive and negative sides of the datum planes. And again, it was a lot more important for sketching and patterning back in the day, but not as important anymore. So if you do want to change the normal direction, you can. Here is something that I use a lot, adjusting the outline. By default, Creo Parametric is going to make the datum plane slightly bigger than your model. And as your model grows in size, your datum planes will automatically adjust. But one way of reducing screen clutter is adjusting the outline. And the default is by size, and we've got these different drag handles that we could use to adjust how big or how small we want the datum plane to appear on the computer screen. There's also this option to lock the aspect ratio, and you can enter in absolute values for the width and the height if you want to. But my preferred method is using the drop-down list to change to reference, and then I'll pick a geometry reference like that surface I used to create it, and that way adjust it to be just slightly bigger than the surface that I created. And we can go to the Properties tab. From here we could change the name of the plane. I'll call this end for the end of the shaft. Let's click the OK button, and that way I have my datum plane created. And again, this is starting to clutter up my screen, so as you're working, hide and unhide your datum planes as necessary. Also, you can use your layers to manage the clutter. In this case, because I opened up this imported model, I don't have any layers, but if I wanted to, I could create a new layer, and I'll call it Planes. And rather than picking the planes one by one, I can go to the Rules tab, and I like to turn on independent and associative to make sure that it grabs all the different planes that already exist and the ones that are going to be created in the future. And I can go to the Edit Rules button, and I'm going to look for features of type, and I'm going to scroll down over here till I find datum plane, and I can preview the results. So there's all the different datum planes in here. Click OK, and then OK. And in this way, I have a rule-based layer that will automatically add the planes to it. And by hiding this, I could end up hiding all my different datum planes. But let me change that back to show because I'm going to create datum planes in this video, and I want you to be able to see them. Let's take a look at some of the various other different creation methods. So here I used through. Let's create another datum plane, and I want to create it offset from this surface. So I can pick this surface, and by default goes to offset. Here's the value. I could change this to a value of 10. You can also change the dimensional value in the dialog box. I'll change it to a value of 5. That's good. Let's click the OK button, and we have another datum plane created. And as I'm working, in order to reduce screen clutter, I'm going to hide them as I create them. The next method, let's create a datum plane that goes through 3 different points. So let's click the plane button, and maybe I wanted to go through this point. I'll hold down the Control key and select this other point, and this point over here. That is enough references. And again, I like to adjust the size. Let's change to reference and pick this particular surface. And that way it's just slightly bigger than that surface. The next method is creating them at an angle. And so I can create a datum plane and then select this edge. You could also select an axis and hold the Control key and then pick this surface over here. And it's giving me a plane at 45 degrees. I can double click on the dimension and change it to 30. You also have a drag handle that you could use to change the angle, but maybe I want this to be at 22.5. That's good. Let's click the OK button. And when I create this datum plane, you'll notice that it is still selected, which allows me to create other features based off of this. So again, big use of datum features is creating other different datum features. So if I hold down the right mouse button, I'll get my mini toolbar and my pop-up menu. I could choose create an axis, hold down the control key and select this other plane. And that way I'm getting an axis through those two different references. Let me turn on my datum axis visibility. And so I've got that axis selected. And if I wanted to, I could hold down the control key, the right mouse button in order to get my mini toolbar and create a plane that goes through that axis, and hold down the control key and pick an edge. So going through two axes or two edges or a combination of an axis or an edge is another way of creating a datum plane. Let's hide that and hide some of these other different ones as I'm going along. Another method of creating a datum plane is creating a midplane. So let's click on the plane tool, and I'm going to pick this particular surface, hold down the control key and select this surface, and you'll notice that it automatically goes to the midplane option. I can go to the properties tab and change the name of this. Maybe I want this called midplane, and then click the OK button. And there we have our midplane halfway through that particular shaft. Some of the other different ways that you have for creating these different planes. I'm going to select the axis even though it is not visible. Let's create a plane through that axis. Again, I don't have enough references. If I hold down the control key and pick this surface, right now it thinks I want to be at an angle, but I can choose to make it parallel to that particular surface and through the axis, or normal to that surface and through the axis. So in that way I have another datum plane created. So those are various different creation methods for the various planes. These planes are features like any other features in your model. So for example, if you wanted to pattern a plane, you could do that. Select the plane, and from the mini toolbar we could choose to pattern it, and I'll change it to a direction pattern. I'll pick a geometry reference in the model. Let's change this to a value of 25, and maybe I want to create 4 of those. And then hit the check mark, and there we have a pattern of planes that are created. So as I mentioned earlier, there are uses for datum planes, but they're not as necessary in later versions of Creo Parametric compared to earlier versions of Creo Parametric, and especially Pro Engineer. And I want to show you a few different ways that you should not use datum planes. Let me hide this one over here. First off, they should not be used for geometric dimensioning and tolerancing. They shouldn't be used for creating set datums as they were known back in the day. Now they are known as datum feature symbols. So for example, I can create a datum plane through this particular surface. Let me change this to through, and then go to the properties tab and call this A, and then click the OK button. So back in the day, after you created a datum plane, or you could select a datum plane, if you hold down the right mouse button, you can go to Properties, and here in the Properties dialog box, this button allows us to change it to be displayed as a set datum for geometric dimensioning and tolerancing. But this is the old 1994 standard. There was a new standard that came out in 2009 in which datum feature symbols should be associated with actual geometry, not these imaginary references like a datum plane. And there was another one that came out in 2018. Actually, it's the 2018 standard, but it was released in January of 2019. But again, this is the old style. You should not be doing this. And if you have any of the old set datums in your model, you should use the conversion tools from Annotation tab, Annotations Overflow, Legacy Datum Annotations Conversion, in order to update them to the 2009 standard. Another reason that you should not use datum planes is due to advances in the ways of creating sketches and extrudes in Creo Parametric 4.0 and later. You don't need them as much for sketch planes and depth references because of some of the options that were added for depth options for your sketch-based features. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let's say that I wanted to create a groove in this model over here on top of this surface. The way that you would do this in older versions is that you would start off by creating a plane for your sketch plane wherever you wanted this to start. Let's say I want it to start at a distance, let's try a value of 10 over here. And so this will be used for my sketch plane, and again, to reduce clutter, I'm going to change the size of the display of the plane. And if I wanted it to go up to a depth of 10 away from this surface, I would create another plane for my eventual depth of the feature. And let's change this to -10, so it goes in the other direction. And again, to reduce screen clutter, I'm going to adjust the outline and use that. So this is the way that you used to have to do things. So for example, I would create my sketch on top of this datum plane. Let me go to my sketch references, and I'm going to grab in here, these different references. And for my sketch, I'm just going to create a circle located on here, drag it out to some distance. Let's change this to a value of 10. And change this dimension also to a value of 10, and then hit the check mark. So now I've got my sketch created. I can use the extrude tool, and let's drag this off in this direction. You have a depth option called toSelected, and then I could use it to pick this particular plane over here. Let's have this remove material, which I'll get to from the mini toolbar. And so that's how you used to have to do things. So in the old way, I had to create two different datum planes in order to make this particular feature. You don't have to do that anymore. Let me delete these features and show you why you don't need to create datum planes anymore for this particular situation. Let me go to create my sketch on this surface. I should have left the sketch. Actually, no, the sketch was in the wrong place. Okay, for my sketch, my reference, let's have that surface face the top of the screen. Let me click sketch over here, and let me add in my reference of this side surface. And let me use the right mouse button to get to the circle command. Again, I'm going to just drag this out, and let's make these dimensions 10 just like before. And I'll use my right mouse button to get to the check mark. So now I've got my sketch, and it's located on this surface over here. If I want to now make this as an extrude, I can get to that from my mini toolbar, which I got to from my right mouse button. It's also the keyboard shortcut of X. Let's flip the direction of this feature, and I'm going to drag this. And here's some of the options that make those datum planes unnecessary. For my depth, I'm going to change this to selected just like before. I'm going to pick this surface, but now we can do an offset. I'm going to offset, and let's make this offset. Let me try 10. Oops. Let's change this to -10. There we go. So now I'm able to offset using toSelected. So that means I no longer have to create a datum plane over there. That's good. Again, I want this to remove material, so let me use the mini toolbar to change to that. And I wanted this to start off a distance of 10 from this particular surface here. Let's change this to a blind value. And here it's a value of 10, but I want it in the negative direction, so let's change this to -10. So now I have a negative depth direction inside too. So in this way, I was able to create my cut without using any other additional datum planes. So that's another reason why datum planes are a lot less necessary in the newer versions of Creo Parametric compared to the older versions. And one rule of thumb that I give people, or I tell people, is that you really only should create datum planes if they're needed for more than one feature. You can create them at the top level. And if they're only needed for one particular feature, then it should be created as an embedded datum inside of the feature. And so what I mean by that one is, let's say that I want to sketch on this particular surface. And again, I'm just going to use an extrude. Let's sketch. And I'm going to sketch on this particular surface over here. And for my orientation reference, let's have this surface face at the top of the screen. And let's create just a circle, snap it on there, about yay big. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to hit the check mark. And let's choose that we want to extrude this particular feature. And let's say for some reason I absolutely needed to create a datum plane for this. I could create a datum plane when I'm in the middle of the tool. If I go to the menu over on the right hand side of the screen, let's create a datum plane, and I'll pick this particular surface, and let's drag this out to a distance of 30. And again, just based on what I showed you earlier, I didn't need to create a datum plane for this, but let's say I'm creating the datum plane anyway, offset to a distance of 30. Then after I've created the datum plane, I can resume the dashboard. And then when I'm dragging this, a little shortcut to get to toSelect. If you hold down the Shift key as you're dragging the depth drag handle, that's another way of getting to the toSelected depth option. And I will hit the check mark. And what you'll notice is if I expand this extrude feature, here we have DTM12. It's automatically hidden. It's located within this feature. That's called an embedded datum. So if you must create a datum plane that's only going to be used by one particular feature, I say embed the datum. It's hidden, but you can always click on it and show it. And if you decide that you do need it for multiple different features, you can actually drag it outside of that junction box, I believe they used to call it, that little arrow inside of the feature indicating that was embedded datum. And now it's no longer embedded, but I believe that's a two-way trip. You should be able to, just drag it back down into a feature. So you can embed datums within a feature if they're only going to be used by one particular feature in order to make your model tree a little bit simpler. So again, datum planes, very powerful type of datum feature. Use them when they are necessary, but please don't go crazy with them. I hope you enjoyed this video. For more information, please visit www.creowindshield.com. If you learned something from this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like this video, please click the subscribe button to be informed when new videos are uploaded. Thank you very much.